Welcome to the second season of the Aviassist Focus Sessions. The Aviassist Foundation has been promoting aviation safety for over a quarter of a century, since 1995. In our focus sessions we aim to inform, inspire and entertain African aviation safety. And we provide you insights in the exciting world of safety and its professionals. This season we're adding something new and exciting. You have a chance to win $100 in each episode. And we do this for two reasons. First, it gives you an insight into what inspires my guests here at the table. And the second reason is that it gives you a chance to win those $100. You'll see a web address at the bottom of the screen, and at that page you can submit the 3 letters that I'll give you throughout the broadcast, and that together form a 3-letter code. Every 10 minutes or so we'll show you one of the favorite books of a guest here at the table. And all you have to do is write down the first letter of the first name of the author. And you'll end up with a 3-letter code. You enter these 3 letters on the Google form page and then click submit. And you can only submit your 3-letter code until 15 minutes after the end of this focus session. And from among the correct answers we'll draw one lucky winner and send that person her or his $100 by mobile money. And we'll announce the winner on our LinkedIn page. Now, over to today. Today we're talking about just culture, the opposite of a blame culture. A just culture helps create an environment where individuals feel free to report errors and help the organization learn from mistakes. In a blame culture, individuals are fired, fined or punished in another way for making mistakes. But the root cause leading to the errors are not investigated and corrected. I'm joined here at the table by Robert-Jan de Boer, my regular sidekick Chamsu Anjorin, and air traffic controller Marvin Langarira. Let's get started and dive into just culture. Robert-Jan, let me start with you. Welcome first of all to the studio here.
Thank you.
You've been in charge of the Aviation Academy of the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences. You're also an experienced researcher and an author, most recently of the book Safety Leadership. What part of your aviation research that you were involved in over the past decades did you actually enjoy most?
I enjoyed very much all of my research, but one project stands out in which we surprised pilots, experienced pilots and novice pilots in turning the engines to idle, one of the engines to idle, without actually announcing that on the ACAM. And as you can imagine, it took them a little while to figure out what was happening. And we found out that everybody succumbed to that sort of delay, not just the experienced or the unexperienced pilots, the younger or the older pilots, but everybody takes a little while or a longer while to identify that something is wrong in the world which doesn't match their mental model. And I think that's actually what happens a lot in organizations around the world. That people take a little bit of time and are surprised, quite right, when they notice that things don't match reality. But we try to keep hold of our mental model of the world, and for good reasons.
Yeah.
But making that explicit was a really worthwhile project.
And I take it that was in the simulator.
It was, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah,
Thanks very much.
Well added, yeah.
Robert-Jan, thanks and welcome again here at the table. Chamsu, you originate in Benin and often say that your careers of 40 years in aviation basically has 2 parts. The first part is when you qualified as an aviation engineer and worked for the then Pan-African Airlines Air Afrique. And the second part of your career is 20 years with aircraft manufacturer Boeing. I think if you know, in that role actually you covered extensively safety, but also the commercial and sales sides of aircraft. Now you're one of the main people behind the Aviation Safety Alliance for Africa and mainly live in Paris. But if I take you back all those years to when you qualified as an engineer back in Benin, how did your friends react to you going into this exciting domain of aviation, or were they all in aviation perhaps?
Well, first of all, my friends were not surprised that I became an engineer because I was already, I was good in math and science, so they expected me to end up being an engineer. And when I graduated, I didn't actually plan to work in aviation.
Okay.
Actually, I was meant to do some research on solar energy at that time, and then a friend advised me to apply for Air Afrique, and which happened to be the good solution. So I entered Air Afrique, and I entered there for 5 years and said, let me just give 5 years to this airline and move to other things. And I stayed 24 years.
And you're still in aviation as well.
And unfortunately, Air Afrique wound it down, and I had the opportunity to join Boeing. And so it lasted 18 years till I retired last year.
So your friends were not surprised, that's what you basically said. And I guess it's nice to see that all those years back, 40 years back, or even more than that, you were already interested in solar energy, which of course now will help also our industry, I'm sure, in terms of sustainability. Well, great to have you, and welcome to the table,
Thank you.
Shamsu. And my third guest is Marvin Rangarira. Marvin, we spoke extensively about your career and your ambitions in one of the previous episodes of the Focus Sessions, which actually is still available on our YouTube channel if people want to watch it back. Your career as an air traffic controller brought you from Zimbabwe then to South Africa and now at Amsterdam Airport. And in that earlier Focus Session, I remember you spoke very passionately of your Zimbabwean homeland. Have you been back dancing in Zimbabwe recently, or?
Unfortunately, due to Corona, that was not as possible, but we're hoping this summer to go back home again so that we can press that reset and re-energizing button. But yeah, I do really miss home. I really miss the atmosphere of celebrating anything and everything that happens in life.
So there will be some dancing happening. I could already see your shoulders move.
That's guaranteed.
That's perfect. Well, gentlemen, all of you, welcome once again, and let's dive into Just Culture. And we'll be looking mostly at three topics today in the broadcast. First of all, what is Just Culture? Why is Just Culture important for our industry? And the last question we'll hopefully look at today is why would staff and leaders in Africa not be buying into this concept? Why would they not be interested in Just Culture? So Robert-Jan, let's bring your long tradition of research and publications in here as well. Without going into too much of technical details, I'm a lawyer myself, so I'd love a perfect definition, of course. But in your mind, in your work, what do you see? What is Just Culture, and why is it important for us to move from a blame culture to a Just Culture?
Yeah, there's actually three cultures if you look at it that way. There's the blame culture, there's the traditional just culture, and there's the restorative just culture, which is actually the phase where we're moving to very much in aviation. The blame culture you've already explained. The traditional just culture is one where we look at what happened in terms of an incident, which rules were valid and which of them were violated and for what reasons, and we decide upon that judgment then what the retribution should be. But that's still very much focused on retribution.
Okay.
And the restorative just culture, which you mentioned in my book, which we cover in my book and which is being promoted elsewhere as well, is one in which we go much more towards restoring trust and relationships. And in doing that, it sounds very soft, doesn't it?
Well, I guess.
But it isn't. The point is that in focusing on trust and relations first, we then learn much more about the incident and the context in which it happened than we ever could in a blame culture or even in a traditional just culture.
So this learning component is a very important component, both of the traditional just culture, as you call it, and the restorative just culture.
Well, more so in the restorative just culture, because one of the criticisms of the traditional just culture is that we focus on the disciplinary part or the violation part, the trespassing part, and therefore forget to look at the systemic factors around the situation which may have caused the incident to occur. And one of the examples that I mentioned before was outside of aviation, where we had a company where there were bales of paper being put into a machine, and these were too light, and so staff would lean on them to make them more heavy so that the machine could process them.
Okay, yeah.
And of course, at one point, someone leaning on it got injured, and the focus was very much on that particular incident, whereas this has been a way of working which has been going on for weeks or months.
Yeah.
And that's what you need to incorporate as well.
So you can also see how other staff would maybe do the same, execute the same procedure.
Yep.
in many ways.
Yep. And of course, I'm making it into a three separate sorts of culture, and there's middle ways. And some people will say the just culture looks at what other people would have done in the same situation as well. Of course, that's often one of the questions which you find in the algorithm. But going a complete step further and looking at how we can restore relations and trust is something which I hope to be able to progress in many organisations in the future.
Well, I mean, and you say that it's a bit of a soft touch, if you like, but I think one of the perhaps slightly silver linings of the dark clouds of Corona, I guess, is that there is more attention in our industry now for the mental side of things and for the person in the system. So I think in that respect, hopefully that will help us move in that direction a bit more and perhaps a bit quicker indeed, that attention for the individual and the system both. Marvin, if I come to you, you work at what they sometimes call the sharp end of aviation safety. You have to deliver it as an air traffic controller nowadays here at Amsterdam Airport. Why do you think the move from a blame culture to a just culture, how do you see that as important in your job?
Yeah, I think the reason why people don't report incidents is because still now it's happening that you get to be blamed for what happened. And there's more focus on the individual, like what Robert has said, as opposed to the system. In essence, if a person makes a mistake, the system should look at how or why the person made the mistake. Probably there's a lack of something behind the scenes, maybe lack of training, or maybe the working conditions are not conducive. So there's really a need to move towards just culture, for people to be able to report freely, so that with more information from the reports, the system is able to become better.
Learn and improve. Yeah.
Okay. But unfortunately, in our line of work, we stop reporting because, you'll be blamed for it. And there are consequences to whatever you do. So, but those that are not empowered enough, to understand just culture, just stop reporting it all, because then there's to shy away from the blame.
Okay, well, if I take it back to you now, Chamsu, to 40 years ago and your years with Air Africa, I remember in the discussions we had before this show, you mentioned this example of overloading that was a continuous issue which you had at one of your stations. How did that and solving that, trying to solve that, relate to just culture, you think? Is there a relation between those two?
Oh, yes. What we noticed then was that at some stations, pilots used to take 1 or 2 tons of fuel over the calculated amount of fuel because they didn't trust the weight that was given to them, and they will adjust also the power thrust in order to take off
with that
extra weight. So they knew at some stations that there were extra weight, and they will pass the information among themselves. So the pilot community knew that when you go to this or this station, you have to be careful. But that information didn't immediately transpire to the management until we noticed through data analysis that this thing was happening.
So each flight they were taking 1,000 kilos extra fuel, basically.
That became the norm, actually, for those stations. When we noticed that, we knew that it was coming from the check-in agents that were very tolerant about the weight. Not only didn't they mention the right weight, baggage weight, but also they probably had some traffic going on there. But we didn't focus on that. We said, okay, let's explain to them why it is important that the weight is correctly reported so that the pilot can trust the weight that is given in those stations. So we train the check-in agents and load masters on the importance of reporting the exact weight of the plane.
So that they could actually also report issues if they saw issues.
Yes, and so that helped because we noticed that the weight report at those stations has improved. The pilots were more confident, and we save fuel and money by solving this problem. No pilot was blamed, no agents was blamed, but the problem was solved this way.
Yeah.
And So that's a typical example of what just culture. We didn't call it, we didn't name the phenomenon, but we thought that that's the right way to do, and it worked.
And I think also it underlines this importance. I think both Marvin and Robert have also mentioned it, that it may very well be that addressing the issue requires training. In this case, by making those ramp staff available of the role of weight in the operation, it gave a safety benefit and even actually a fuel benefit, which of course, especially nowadays with the high prices. And actually, I've heard that a lot. We're working on developing a load control course with aviassist, and the gentleman who's in charge of that actually also mentioned that a lot of airlines, often in Africa, to address the issue you just described, don't exactly know the exact weight of their aircraft, and so they lose money through burning extra fuel, taking extra fuel in that way. Okay, well, a great example of in those early days, basically, the just culture. Gentlemen, if you feel you want to agree or disagree, don't hesitate at all, of course. Or this is not a point I guess we can disagree with, but if there are other moments where you think this brings a memory back to me. But Marvin, if I can just take you to you. You've made this journey from Zim to South Africa to here. Different national cultures, of course. Also different just cultures, you think? Different reporting cultures?
I'd say, the just culture is not applied universally as it should be in every country, and mainly because of perhaps the nature or the origins of the leadership, perhaps in a specific ANSP. I've worked in one of the ANSP where predominantly it was people with a military background, as an example. They tended to be a little bit more punitive as opposed to be restorative. When somebody would make a mistake, then you'd really get the hiding.
The whip.
Like you're taken off position, and in some instances it went as far as somebody losing a specific rating. So to say you never practice as an approach controller, for example, you only do tower because you made such a mistake in this domain. So in that case, then it was really purely a blame culture. But I've seen also in different NSPs, there's some mature just culture that
coming up.
There's a system that is there that is supportive to the people that are involved, and people look at such occurrence as the problem that relates to the whole system, that we need to do something about it. So, but however, it does not necessarily, me saying this, that perhaps in Africa it's not applied.
No, of course not. No.
It's applied like to some advanced extent, and also here in Europe you see a different variation of the same thing. Just
different cultures, different organizations, etc.
That's true. Yeah.
This brings me actually to the first book, part of your 3-letter code. This is a book that Robert Jan brought to the studio. It's the book Sully, and it was written by Chesley. So the first letter of your 3-letter code is the letter C, Charlie, as they would say in air traffic control. Robert Jan, why did you bring this to the studio today?
Yeah, I bought it because of the theme of just culture. What we see in what happened in this flight that Sully put down safely on the Hudson, and also QF-32, the A380 that landed successfully, is that the people who were at the controls at the time are seen as heroes. The book, the movie. Whereas in reality, we in aviation know that there's lots and lots and lots more people who were involved in ensuring that these incidents didn't turn into catastrophes.
There's no single hero in a way.
There's not a single hero. And just like in a blame culture or in a traditional just culture, we tend to focus on just a single perpetrator, which I don't think we should be doing.
No.
I don't think we should see these incidents. And I'm sure Sully and the Cuspin don't see themselves as heroes, but they are using, of course, the podium which they have now been offered by the press and the public.
Yes.
That we should see them as the ultimate or only hero of these incidents.
Because that's good behavior we can learn from, instead of singling it out as a single hero.
Supernatural behavior, yes, absolutely.
And look at the system behind
the design of the aircraft, the fact that there were lots of boats around to help disembark the passengers, the flotation of the aircraft, the flotation devices which helped some passengers, all that infrastructure. Even the air traffic controllers who didn't literally help in finding the Hudson. I think they found the Hudson quite easily by themselves. Was still very much involved in ensuring that the flight could continue and had alternatives. Despite the fact that they eventually, in the end, they ended up in the Hudson.
They brought calm to the situation with their radio voices, traffic controllers like yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I really think we should focus on the whole system, both when things go sour and when things turn out well.
And look at what we can learn from the good examples, indeed, which is a bit safety 2.0, isn't it? Not just look at the things that go wrong, and actually also in our human factors courses that we bring to Africa on a regular basis with our instructor Frank Club, we really focus on that systemic view, indeed, that try not to look just at somebody who did something wrong or somebody who did something really good, significantly.
Not as an individual. Yeah.
Thanks for that suggestion there, Robert Jan. So let's see, we were at this point of, Marvin just having said the variety of just cultures and the different maturity levels, and I fully agree with you, Marvin, that it is too easy and not correct if we would say, well, in Africa there is no such thing as just culture. On the contrary, that's also maturing. And actually that brings me to an interesting question which we got from one of the viewers out there, Kapembo from Zambia. He was wondering, he said, to what extent can penalties for causing an accident be dropped in order to promote a just culture? What he had witnessed, for example, were charges to smaller safety occurrences were dropped in order to help the organization mature. Do you think that approach could work for a serious occurrence as an accident? So to drop that charges because you say, well, as an organization, we want to learn bigger things and not just the smaller things? Jamsu?
Well, I don't. When we're talking about dropping charges, or so, it's already
complaints. I guess they need to say.
It's still in the punitive environment. I think the message should always be that systems need to work in a certain way, and that during that process there could be some errors or some dysfunctioning. I would say, I don't know if the word is correct, but and what goes wrong or what goes right needs to be investigated and learned from, and so that goes beyond the individuals. And the only way you can learn from a system is through the people of the system. So,
but could it be an idea to drop those or to overlook smaller errors? That's basically Kampembo's question, you think, or is that a risk, Robert Jan?
I would think probably if it's a willful violation, I wouldn't consider dropping it,
no,
because
it's a small thing.
That has to be corrected and an example has to be made. But if it's an honest mistake and there's a reasonable amount of evidence that it was just a mere mistake,
and maybe the consequences were very small.
Were very small as well. I think would consider dropping it, but not dropping it per se, but also don't shy away from investigating it further to get actually the information that's required so that there's no repeat of the same occurrence.
You can still learn, even if it's a small error.
Even if it's small, don't drop it officially that you're not going to be punished for it, but still continue investigating and find where the problem lies and correct it.
I think we should drop it completely.
Oh, okay.
The reason is,
that's interesting.
And the reason is that we want to learn. We want to learn as much as possible. And we can learn from small things. We learn from big incidents. Of course we do. When they're out in the open, there's no hiding them. But we also want to learn from small incidents. And we need to trust our colleagues to report things which they think can be done safer. And that includes reporting their own mistakes. Now, who would ever report
a
their
small
own mistakes
thing if it's
if you get punished for it? So I think we're completely down the wrong track if we even have any punishment. And with all respect, Marvin, even that choice between willful violations and what you called an honest mistake, who gets to make that call?
Yeah, who gets to make the call?
Yeah. I mean, I come to work every day just like you and just like all the other aviation professionals that we have in the world, to do a good job to the best of our abilities, and we are all limited by the capabilities that we have as humans, and that research which I talked about earlier shows exactly that. All of the pilots that we put into that simulator did not notice the idle situation immediately, and they varied in the time it took, but there is no setting a limit that after 23 seconds, which used to be a norm, you are doing a proper job, and after 23 seconds you failed. We don't want to see that. That's purely artificial. And so we need to trust all of the people working in aviation to cope with the variety of everyday work to the best of their abilities in the moment. And then we need to, when we feel that things have gone really well or have gone wrong, we need to use that context to learn.
Yeah, and I think indeed, Robert, that learning from things that go well, that's, I know, something you're also a very big proponent of, indeed. And that, like I said before, they seem to call it safety 2.0. I think that's very interesting, because it's so easy to look at the things we do wrong in the industry, whether it's ground handling or piloting or air traffic control. But why not look at those things that go well and learn from that? And it also means you celebrate, you know, good achievements, and you celebrate things that happen nicely in the industry, indeed. Okay, so no clear answer in terms of votes then for...
I think the more I was listening to him talk, I'm more inclined to his kind of way of reasoning. And yeah, they classify incidents according to severity and probability. And I would say perhaps it could be agreed that, okay, if it's not severe and there's no probability that it will happen again, yeah, we can.
For the sake of learning and for the sake of creating that trust.
See, the thing that I do today, for instance, in the car, say I were to app in my car and there would be no consequences, then in your light there would be no punishment. Whereas if I did exactly that same action and I would cause an accident, then all of a sudden, even though I did exactly the same action, you would judge it very differently. So using outcome, and which is part of the just culture problem as well, using outcome as one of the ways of evaluating how bad an action was is not right. In a complex world, which aviation is, the same action can have very different outcomes.
Yeah,
okay,
interesting.
I believe the focus shouldn't be on we charge it, we drop or not a charge, is what do we learn from the situation? And maybe learning from the situation can lead to some disciplinary action, but it doesn't have to be the purpose of it. And because you cannot completely exclude the fact that there may be gross misconduct or violations that are not tolerated in the system. A system shouldn't tolerate everything. So there should be some rules, although that's not the purpose of the analysis. That's what do we learn from the incident? And that is we learn more from the incident than from the punishment.
It's time for our next book, actually, Chamsu, which is your book, Crucial Conversations, written by Kerry Patterson. So the first letter of the first name is the K, Kilo. So that's for your 3-letter code. In a nutshell, Chamsu, why did you bring this book to the studio today?
Yeah, because within an enterprise, a company, and it has to do with just culture, where people can talk and speak freely and have meaningful conversation. But if there is no trust, and there is this fear of whatever, you have stereotype behaviors that doesn't lead to a productive or an efficient organization.
So having those conversations is crucial. Really.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Thanks very much. Let's go to a next question from the audience, which actually comes from Serge. He's an air traffic controller in Senegal. And maybe if I can bring this initially to you, Robert-Jan. Serge's question is, how do we assess the effectiveness and efficacy of a just culture policy? So how do we see it's actually delivering, if you like?
That's a bit of a trick question for me, of course, because the traditional just culture, I have difficulty in assessing its effectiveness. I believe it's actually pushing or porting underground with the threat of retribution. The effectiveness of a restorative just culture, which I talked about before, is actually easy to see, and that is that trust and relationships are restored after the incident. And what we see happening is that people are reinstalled in their position, particularly if the error is one in which they learn a lot and can help disseminate amongst their colleagues that this is not the right way of doing things. I was mistaken, or whatever reason the incident that caused the immediate incident, that was close to the incident. We need to redesign stuff. That sort of consequences come out of restorative approach. And having then seeing people being reintegrated into the company, allowing them to realize their full potential, but also their colleagues and managers trusting those people again.
These crucial conversations, I guess.
Yes,
that
absolutely.
Shamsu
It's very worthwhile. Even up to the point there, and Shamsu mentioned that just now, we don't, in a restorative approach, exclude disciplinary measures. That people who are close to an incident actually accept that the disciplinary consequences are, we can accept them, acknowledge them, accept them, live by them.
As we can move on.
Yes,
we can move on
and they understand why disciplinary action is necessary for the credibility of the organization. Yeah, and so we can sense that. We don't really want to measure it, but we can sense in an organization that when that sort of discussions are taking place, that sort of dialogues was the word we came up to, instead of interviews, which is much more
crucial
just culture.
conversation.
The dialogue. That those are taking place is really visible.
Yeah. And I guess with those dialogues, I mean, you mentioned in your opening words, the softer side of the softer terminology. But I think if we want those dialogues, especially also by bringing the point you brought, Marvin, of a lot of in air traffic control in Africa, for example, people being coming from a military background, maybe we should really focus a bit more on those softer sides, to have those conversations, isn't it? To be able to move away to almost a pleasant conversation, as I hope we have them here today. But I mean, I think it might be.
Interestingly enough, without me mentioning, I think some of it, the presence of just culture needs to be visible. One of the airports I've worked with,
yes,
without me naming, they have a saying that we don't leave anybody behind. So when anything happens, you know that the team is behind me. Mm-hmm. So an incident happened and everybody was there to help. And be it, what do you need? Everybody would come in maybe on a friendly basis outside the formal channels. They're trying to, are you okay? Besides
to restore,
that, to restore that same trust. Because if you trust your team to be with you, then you're bound.
You're not on your own.
You're not on your own.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah.
Brings me to the third book for your 3-letter code out there. A book called Fate is the Hunter, written by Ernest Gahn. So the first letter is the E, the echo for your code. That makes 3 letters now. Beautiful book. So that was the last book for today. Gentlemen, thank you very much for that. I'm afraid we're approaching the end of the time we have available here today, which is a bit annoying, I find, because I'd love to continue, but who knows, maybe we can continue this discussion at some other time. Thank you very much for joining me here today in the studio, in the broadcasting capital of Hilversum. It was great to have you. Thank you out there as well for tuning in for safety today, because that's what you've done, maybe without realizing it, but you've tuned into safety today. Join us in Africa soon for one of the 4 exciting safety courses that we're offering from 14 to 16 September in Kigali. We'll bring you a human factors course for aviation, a peer support training for pilots and cabin crew, and an aviation insurance course. And coming to Rwanda in September means you can also visit Africa's biggest conference and exhibition organized by our partners, Times Aerospace. That's Aviation Africa 2022, which is taking place in Kigali in Rwanda on the 12th and 13th of September. We would love for you to come and see us at our stand at the exhibition. And so for more information about the courses, about the conference and exhibition, check out our website at the address that is displayed below here. And then I think all that's left for me is to say, join us again next month for another focus session. Same time, same frequency. For now, kwaherini and have a good day.